3, 2, 1, it's going. Okay, so good to see everyone. Good afternoon. It's nice to be back in the saddle or podium after a break, especially because of the way the calendar has worked out this year. We get to talk, I get to talk and teach about some sections of the Torah that often fall during my vacation time, and so I don't get to do lessons on them. And so I am going to greedily try and talk about two different Torah portions at the same time. Last week's, which was Korach, and this week's, which is Chukkat. And both of those are going to deal with the issue of leadership, which also seems rather timely within our own national debate, although we will refrain from endorsing any political parties in this room. But to contemplate what leadership is, how we treat leaders, and also how we treat each other, hopefully will be part of this discussion. So a quick recap, because we're trying to do two stories at once. Korach. What happened in the story of Korach?
Rebellion.
Okay, so Korach was rebellion. What are you rebelling against?
The authority.
Ah, no one's going to give me the answer? What do you got?
Yeah.
Rebel without a cause? No? Everyone. All right. I was trying to do the movie quote there. Sorry.
You're rebelling against authority.
Okay, so rebelling against authority, specifically Moses, and possibly also Aaron. Perhaps Moses's authority to appoint Aaron was also one of the major issues. And who was involved in this rebellion? We always call it Korach's rebellion.
Yeah, a group of people that have surrounded him.
All right, so it's Korach plus at least two other guys, plus another small group, right? Some of the leaders and elders. All total, we ended up with somewhere around 250 plus people that were the main agitators involved in this whole section. And how did this end?
Not good for Korach.
Not well, right. The ground opens up and it swallows them and their co-conspirators and their families, gone off the face of the earth. It's one of the rare cases of full-on, straight-up, incontrovertible divine action leading to the destruction of a particular group of people. It's a pretty extreme episode. This week, we pick up in Parashat Chukkat, which is very famous, and we will be reading it with the story of the stone and water. This is where Moses gets into trouble. This is where Moses does the famous strike the stone for the water to come out, and God says, thank you very much for your services. Here's your gold watch. You will not be reaching the land of Israel. And we have to struggle with what went wrong. But that one we are going to use for our main text today. So if you can turn to page 883, we're going to get cracking. I don't suppose we have any volunteers to read?
I read a word this whole few months.
That's right. If you really
Twist your arm?
Somebody.
Okay.
Chapter 20?
Chapter 20, right at the bottom.
The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there.
All right. So Miriam, of course, is Moses' sister. And Miriam has been also implicated in another mini challenge to authority, depending upon how you translate that section, when she and Aaron got into a bit of a tussle over Moses's wife issues and got their hands slapped quite severely, Miriam in particular. And now she has finally passed.
The community was without water.
All right. So this is the origin of a very famous midrash, which says that there was a well of water that traveled with the Israelites all throughout the land of Sinai, and that well was solely on account of Miriam. So Miriam dies, though we run out of water. The rabbis make the connection in reverse. We ran out of water because Miriam died. That she went, therefore her well went, therefore the people were without water, and that's going to lead to our main focus. 884. We all on the same page? Good.
So the community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. Why have you
Okay,
brought..."
so what our brothers perish at the instance of the Lord?
Korah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better that we have been wiped out in one moment with the earth swallowing us whole.
Than thirsty in the desert.
Right. Which is essentially saying we should have joined them when they were rebelling against you, because they were right. You are a bad leader. There is something wrong with you. And therefore, look what you've led us to, right? We should have gone ahead and taken our chances and done a revolution then, because even if we died, better to be dead than dying of thirst.
Because they're seeing it as Moses' fault that they have no water.
Of course.
Yes.
Who else is in charge?
Always blame the leaders.
The buck stops there, right? Or the shekel stops there. That's exactly the issue. They have been complaining throughout the entire book of Bamidbar. Complaining, I know, Jewish people complaining. Who would have ever thought it, right? So this is precisely the crescendo of the arguments and the complaints. Remember, so far we've had the issue of meat that was met with the quail and all of that. We've had the issue of the spies, which is what condemned them to 40 years in the desert. Right? We had the issue with Miriam and the brother. We had the issue with Korah. We've had the issues of going up to fight or not fight and getting beat, and then all of that. This has been a quarrelsome time. So with Miriam dying and the water gone, the people just revert to form and throw a tantrum.
Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink.
Okay. Kind of a valid complaint in that this is not exactly the most lovely place in the world. Anyone who's ever visited Sinai or in the current political climate has just seen pictures of Sinai will tell you this is not like the place that you'd want to live. And now that they know they're being stuck there, now that they're stuck there for 40 years, even more are you unhappy.
Yes, we'd rather be back as slaves in Egypt where they could beat us and we had no lives on our own. Why'd you take us out of that wonderful place?
But we were alive.
We were alive. We had figs.
Right? But think for a moment, is that not the case for many, many people? That if you have, bad here and you have good situation here, and going from bad to good means not just doubt, but hardship. Right? So it's hardship, not just that, it's maybe things will work out or not. It's maybe we're going to get to the good, but we're not getting there now. But we're leaving the security of the bad, which gave us life, which gave us food, which allowed us to live, even though it was bad. And things are still bad, but we're free, thanks, free to die of thirst in the desert, for the promise of a land that we don't believe enough in, and believe enough in God's power to deliver to us. So yeah, I'm going to complain when I'm sitting here. It turns out they also complain even when they get the good, but that's a whole nother story. All right, so Moses' response.
And Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts."
Okay, so what's the plan?
Go talk to the rock and it will give water.
Go talk to the rock and give water.
And if it does that, that really looks quite miraculous. So these people who are saying God isn't performing miracles for us anymore like he did with Korah, there will be a miraculous water coming from a rock.
But, well, it's not the first time, first of all.
Right.
The first time happened right after we left Egypt.
That's right.
Where God told Moses to go take his staff and strike a rock.
Yes.
And he did, and water came out. And now Moses has been told to go take his staff and speak to the rock, and water will come out. Anyone begin to see where some misunderstanding might creep in?
Yes.
Moses is like, yeah, I've done this before.
Right.
And we got some other issues coming up here. Keep going.
Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank.
Okay, so rebelling against God, against Moses' authority, against God's authority, against Aaron's authority, against Moses being possibly nepotistic in appointing his brother, and the unfair and unequal distribution of the goods. Those seem to be the crux of the coalition of Korach's rebellion, right? Those were their mistakes, their errors. That was what they were riled up about. What did Moses do wrong? What was Moses's sin?
Taking credit to himself by hitting a rock.
All right.
Rather than just talking to it and say, look what it's got.
So taking credit both because he struck the rock, thereby using a physical act which could be excused, and indeed the Midrash goes exactly that way, and says, the people are going to say, oh yeah, you used to live out here in the wilderness. You know all the rocks to hit in order to uncover the hidden springs. So that's what you did. Whereas speaking to it would undeniably create a miracle, right? So the striking rather than the speaking seems to be taking credit away from God, as does I'm just going to abbreviate. Shall we get water from this rock? Moses doesn't say, will God bring water from this rock? He says, we. Is this the royal we? Since when are you doing anything, Moses? You have no power, no innate abilities, no magic of your own. You are simply an instrument that is pointing the people to take their attention and turn it towards God. And yet he seems to be speaking as though he himself, or he plus his brother, are going to give this as a boon to the people. That's a pretty bad problem there. What else did Moses do wrong?
Got angry.
Yeah.
All right. Anger and insult. Listen up, you rebels. Not the way to start a speech. Especially not the way to start a speech of conciliation. Remember, his job is to lead the people, not to berate them, not to humiliate them, not to tear them down, especially when God has told him, go get the water. Did God tell him, rebuke the people? No.
But all they do is pick on him. No matter what he does, they're yelling at him. They don't like him. They're complaining. He's lost his patience with them by now. He's only a human being after all. He's not Hashem. He's not God. So all they do is complain.
He's only a human being who has just buried his sister.
But he didn't, that's true too. He didn't hit them, which is probably what he wanted to do. He hit the rock.
Okay. So he is only a human being.
Yes.
And he is also Moses, the paragon and avatar of God, of what God is speaking to the people and transmitting to the people. When you occupy that office, when you sit in that big chair, you don't get to just be a human being, especially in public, especially when you are fulfilling a command of God. You don't. You're not just
Right.
Moses, son of Amram,
Right.
and Yocheved, and just the guy who married Zipporah. You're not just your average Joe who happens to be doing an important job. Everything you do is much more significant and reflects immediately back towards God, which is what we're going to see in the next paragraph.
But this is the man who saw an Egyptian beating a
Mhm.
Jewish slave and didn't say, stop it, I'm the prince, go away. He killed him.
Right?
He acts that way. He was actually praised for that because he then got selected to be the leader of the Jewish people. And all of a sudden now we want him to be mild and meek and please people, listen to me.
So you think the best way for a leader to get people's allegiance to himself and or to God is through abuse, whether it be verbal or physical?
Oh, that's a very interesting question.
We can intimidate you into
Yes.
following Torah.
Stalin would say yes. Yes.
Yeah, Stalin would say
It
yes.
has worked.
The tens of millions that he murdered might have
Might
another
not,
review of
but
that
still,
issue.
he got the power. That's a very interesting question because we want Moses to be a strong leader and yet be nice.
Right.
Can you be both? That's a good question.
But think for a moment, right? The anger and the insult is also a reflection on God. What does Moses' behavior say about God?
That's right.
Is that the way God wants to interact with his children? Does God want to be the angry God of the Old Testament as people talk about it? That's not what God wants. God does not want to have the people follow his ways because of constant threat of ground opening up and lightning bolts from heaven. God wants people to follow the ways because the people love God and they understand that God cares for them enough to have given Torah and to lead them to this place. The abuse that Moses hurls at them completely defeats that goal. Rather than being the caretaker who comes and leads them to the water and opens their eyes to the beauty of what God has already provided for them, he becomes the angry guy with a stick. And that goes against what the relationship God wants to have with the people. That's a problem.
If you think about it in today's terms, non-Jews will point to the Torah and say, look, you people killed others, the earth opened up and swallowed, and they're missing your point.
Of course.
That's not what God wanted, it's
what happened, exactly. And indeed, there are a number of websites and groups out there that try to point out, the brutality of the Bible and how terrible, and they say, oh, people are murdering each other and there's incest over here. It's like, yeah, and that's all bad. I mean, it'd be like reading the courtroom docket of, the state versus so-and-so and saying, oh, look, the courts approve of that. No, the courts don't approve of that. The court is showing you what's wrong in order that it can then be handled. And it's not just the people that are making a mistake here. Moses seems to be making a mistake, right? He is missing the opportunity, or in fact, denigrating God's presence in the people. Any other mistakes? How about just obedience? He didn't do what God told him to do, right? For whatever reasons and whatever the other implications were of it, whether it was he was stealing credit for it and getting angry or whatever, and the push comes to shove, he also failed to fulfill the commandment of God. God told him, take the staff and go talk to the rock, and he didn't. And he didn't twice, right? How many times did he hit the rock? Twice. So maybe the first one was him being angry. And the second one, what's the excuse for that? Right? It's you've let your anger out, and now what? You're building on it? Or are you going to back off from it? But whatever the case was, he didn't do what God told him to do. And one of the fundamental principles of all of Judaism is the commandments are there to be performed, not to be set aside when we are angry, or when we don't feel like it, or when we are just too excited to bother. The commandments are the commandments. And if Moses can set aside the commandments when he doesn't feel like it, if Moses can choose when to obey or not obey, what does that mean about the rest of us? Moses, all the more so because he knows God more closely and intimately than any other human being that has ever lived before or since, should feel the draw of fulfilling what God has asked him to do more than any other person. That intimacy should not give him more freedom. That should take away that sense of entitlement. But instead, it's like being completely in love with a person. You are more likely to do what that person wants rather than less. And yet Moses doesn't.
What is the significance of the rod? Because God says, take the rod and assemble the people. Now, if you didn't have that rod, you wouldn't have hit it.
Exactly. And that's what the commentators point out. It's like God almost suckered Moses into this, right? He'd done it before with the rod striking. He's told to take the rod and go to the rock. I mean, it's almost like he's setting himself up. But if you can't notice that this is different than that these instructions were not identical to those instructions, then you have no business leading. If you can't see the fine distinctions, if you can't control your anger, if you can't make sure that your ego doesn't get in the way, you have no business in charge.
But the rod then is also a symbol of his leadership over this group of people. It's almost like a talking stick. You've got the rod, okay? They will follow you. Now talk to the rod.
Right.
Don't say use the rod, except to say, hey guys, we're all gathering around the stick here, So
it's a good point that is being formed. The idea that in the heat of the moment is an excuse. It's not.
No.
It's for a leader.
Not
There's no heat of the moment
correct.
for a leader. You don't get that free pass.
You don't have that luxury. right? Because your decisions impact everyone else below you. And so if you can't put your ego aside, if you can't temper your emotions, and you can't follow simple instructions or even complicated ones, here's the gold watch. I'm very sorry, but you're no longer going to be the leader. You have just moved out. But it's interesting the way the Torah talks about God's reaction. So verse 12.
But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, through which he affirmed his sanctity.
Okay. So what does God explicitly say they did that was the sin?
Didn't obey.
Did he
trust?
But did
They
it?
didn't let God show them that God was in charge.
He
It looked
didn't
like Moses was in charge by hitting the rock.
didn't trust enough to affirm my sanctity. What number is that in the legal code? Is that a 282? I mean, where did they not? What action was the not trusting? Which, I mean, God does not say explicitly, because you yelled at the people, you showed that you did not trust me enough to sanctify. Or because you hit the rock, it showed that you did not trust me. Or because you ran back to the tent of meeting, something we didn't talk about, rather than knowing what you should do, showed you didn't trust me enough to. It says the implication of some action, but the action itself is hidden in God's description of his rebuke to Moses and Aaron. He talks about the effect of what they did, but he doesn't describe which action in particular, or whether it was the cumulative effect of all of their actions that created that effect of not trusting enough to sanctify my name.
I think it's about the fact that he didn't obey. He respected the sanctity of God, he would have obeyed.
And there is a lot of different things we can think about and wonder about what happened here. And that's where we're going to turn, right? So you ready for the swerve? The swerve is, how dare we accuse Moses of these actions? Because we don't know exactly what he did that was wrong. We knew he did something wrong, because he said, you did something wrong, you're not going to go in. But we don't know what.
Or maybe all of those things.
Or maybe all, but how can we say what he did or didn't do? How do we criticize our leader? Okay, so this is going to, like I say, straddle the story of Korach as well as the story here. So we're going to back up a little bit and talk about some of the ringleaders in the Korach story and what may or may not have been their motivation and the part that they played. All right, so Sanhedrin. From the top?
From the top. The congregation of Korach has no share in the world to come, as it is said, and the earth covered them.
Meaning in this world.
In this world. And they disappeared from the midst of the congregation, which means in the world to come.
All right, so very short little midrash. There's a passage that is taught in the Mishnah that is then expanded upon in the Talmud, which says that the people of Korach have no share in the world to come. That means they are gone and gone. Right? They will not be resurrected in the future. Their souls have been simply extinguished for all time, which is huge. I mean, that is one of the most, probably the most massive thing that the tradition can ever say about a person or a group of people, as being they were bad. They are so bad, they don't even get punished later and then have their share in the world to come. They just do not pass go. Do not go to jail. Remove your token from the board. You are out of the game forever. It's huge. Why? Why do we understand that? Well, the Midrash is pretty clear. The earth covered them and they were removed. It's redundant. If the earth covered them, of course they were removed from the congregation. Therefore, each part of the sentence must be teaching its own thing. The earth covered them, they died, and they were removed. They're never coming back. Okay, but what does that mean? And what about the people involved?
So so says Rabbi Akiva.
So that was Rabbi Akiva's sentence, sorry.
Rab said, On ben Pelet was saved by his wife.
Right, so On ben Pelet was one of the other guys mentioned in the early stages of the Korach story, and we don't exactly hear about him later on. So he must have been spared.
She
And
said
his
to him,
wife saved him. How did his wife save him?
because she said to him, "What is the difference to you? If Moses will be master, you are only a disciple, and you will be in the same position if Korach is the master."
Right? It's like you're going to rebel against Moses because Moses is in charge. But if Korach wins, Korach will be in charge and you'll be no better off. So what are you doing? Right?
Pragmatic.
Very pragmatic wife, yes.
And his answer, "What shall I do? I was with them in consultation and swore to take part with them." She
So
said,
I'm on the hook, right?
What am I gonna do?
I already raised my hand and said, I swear my life and say, what is it, my sacred life and fortune to this rebellion. I got to show up, don't I?
So his wife said, "I know that the whole congregation is holy, as it is written in Numbers, for the whole of the congregation are all of them holy. Remain in your house, and I will save you." She made him drink wine to intoxication, and she made him sleep in the house, and she herself sat outside at the entrance of the house, uncovered her head, loosened her hair, and whoever came to his house to call upon On, when he saw the uncovered head of the woman, returned.
Okay, so cultural understanding important here. So the whole congregation is holy, which means despite the rebellion, they are modest and proper people. And a woman with her hair uncovered and loosened and all of that, you don't go talk to another guy's wife when she's dressed like that. That is just not what you do. Right? That is stepping across a line. In modern parlance, I'm trying to think of something as bad. Imagine you come to someone's house and the lady of the house opens the door and she's wearing a towel, right? And her hair is soaking wet and all of that. And she says, "Come on in," and she's going to sit on the sofa and talk to you while she's wearing a towel. Most people, I would imagine, would say, "Tell you what, I'll come back another time." Right? Actually, I just remembered something I got to pick from the car. I'll be back in 5 minutes. You wouldn't feel comfortable going into your friend's house while his wife is sitting there in a towel. It just wouldn't. Of course, most people wouldn't open the door in the first place. But I'm trying to come up with something that would be similar. So she is sitting in a position that will deliberately forestall any of these other guys from coming in asking, "Hey, where's On?" So she doesn't have to lie. He's drunk, so he's out of it anyway, and therefore not responsible for not showing up to the rebellion meeting. He overslept and missed the coup, and that's how she saves him.
And perhaps if he were not drunk, he would have argued with her and tried to push his way out and go there.
Not argue, but if he had not been drunk,
He
he
would've gone.
would have been obligated to go because he had vowed to go.
And he couldn't say, "My wife didn't let me." That wouldn't have been so good.
No, but being drunk, he couldn't go. It's
That's
like he
right.
deliberately made himself sick.
Well,
And if you're sick,
she made him drunk.
well, she did it
She
for him.
understood.
Yes.
Yes, she did it for him. Wow. Meantime, the congregation was swallowed.
And all those who showed up, we know what happened to them.
On the other hand, the wife of Korach said to him, "See what Moses did. He proclaimed himself as a king. His brother he made high priest. The sons of his brother for adjuncts of the high priests. Heave offering he commanded us to give to the priests. And even from the tithes, which are for the Levites, he commands to give again 1/10 to the priest. And not only this, he made of you fools by commanding all the Levites to shave off all their hair so that you should look like prisoners."
All right. So this wife is pointing out all of the grievances that they have against Moses and Aaron.
And
And
to his answer, he himself also did so. Korach himself cut his hair. She said,
no. Korach is saying, but Moses
Yes.
also cut his hair off. I mean,
Moses
Moses is a Levite. So yeah, Moses did these things, but he also is doing
Did
these
all
things.
those
So
things.
he's right there with us.
"Since all the glory belongs to him, he does not care," etc.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. So he cut his hair. Big deal. He's still king.
And he's giving tithes to the priests, which are his brother's kids, not his kids. And
Correct.
he's still doing it.
Correct. But he's got the glory, so he can sacrifice those little things, but he's getting all the benefits. What are you guys getting? The rest of you Levites.
And this is meant by the passage in Proverbs, "The wise among women builds her house," referring to the wife of On ben Pelet. "But the foolish pulls it down with her own hands," referring to the wife of Korach.
All right, so good advice, bad advice here, leading towards or away from, well, life. one side egging on, the other side holding back. Now, like I said, we don't know about On ben Pelet exactly what happened. The Midrash tries to imagine something here for us by giving us a contrast of why him and not Korach and vice versa. But if you were to just read the text and say On ben Pelet was part of the conspiracy, what conclusions would you come to about this guy? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Not from this, but just from the Torah where it says he was part of the conspiracy. Would we condemn him as being as evil as Korach? Even though we don't get one sentence about part of a sentence.
He is what his wife said. He's a follower. He's a disciple. So whoever is the strong leader, he's brought up to follow. On the other hand, he had at least some integrity to think that what he was doing probably wasn't exactly the right thing to do. But since he had vowed to do it, he was going to go through with it. But his wife had a...
Well, he had the good sense to marry a good person. That also helps, but it's hard to condemn him, isn't it? Isn't it also by this Midrash hard to condemn Korach? That he was being egged on, push by this voice that was telling him that he should be jealous and he should be angry and he should, he deserves more than what he's got?
No.
You don't feel sorry for him?
I don't feel sorry for him because one doesn't have to yield to these things.
True.
Well, but On ben Pelet listens to his wife and he's saved, and we say, hey, that was good.
Mm-hmm.
And Korach listens to his wife and he's not saved. He said, oh, idiot, he listened to his wife. But you can't have it both ways.
Correct. Well, you can by saying it's not a question of listening to your wife is good or bad. It's listening to good advice is good. Listening to bad advice is bad. And the source of the advice isn't the main issue here. As they just said, a good woman, a wise woman, will build her house and a foolish one will tear it down. It's not the woman that's important. It's the wisdom or foolishness that's important.
And he has to be wise enough to distinguish the difference and know which is which.
We hope.
We
On
hope.
the other
Yes.
hand, of course, when Sarah wanted Hagar to go away and Abraham didn't want it, Abraham was told, obey your wife.
Yes, that's right.
In this matter.
That followed. I tried that with my husband. He said, did they mention my name?
Actually, in the Talmud, they do say you have to listen to your wife. Now, listen doesn't mean heed when incorrect, but it does mean you don't do things without consulting. All right. Reish Lakish has some more topics on this issue.
Reish Lakish said, he who suspects an innocent man will receive bodily punishment, for it's written in Exodus, but behold, they will not believe me.
Okay. So first of all, the idea here is that...
Is Pluto a planet?
Good question. So the idea here is, first of all, that if you accuse or even suspect somebody that is innocent of wrongdoing, it's going to come back to haunt you. You're going to suffer because of it. If you think, that guy over there, he always looks like he's so good. I make you bet he's probably blah, 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 blah. You are getting yourself in trouble by suspecting somebody that's innocent. Make sense? And he has a proof. And the proof is taken from Exodus. This is when Moses is meeting God at the burning bush. And God says, I want you to go back and free my people and tell them that, that God is with them and da-da-da-da-da. And Moses says, they won't believe me. Okay? Keep going.
It was known to the Holy One, praised be he, that Israel would believe him. And he said unto Moses, they are believers, the children of believers, but I know you will finally not believe, because you have not had confidence in me. Whence do we learn that he was punished? It's written in Exodus. And the Lord also said to him, put your hand upon your chest.
And when he pulls it out, it's covered in the tzara'at, the leprous affliction. That was his physical punishment. So who did Moses suspect wrongly?
The people.
The people.
The people.
And God. Right? So the people is the most important part here, because when God says, go talk to them, and he says, they won't believe me, we might have thought that was Moses being modest and thinking, I'm not good enough, that why would they believe me? But what God says is, no, through you, they will believe in me, God, because they are people who still believe in me, no matter what you may think. Therefore, you have now suspected them of a lack of faith, because they will believe in whoever I send, because that's the kind of people they are. And you doubted them. You doubted the people, just like we find later on. He is angry with the people, and this is the way they're reading it here.
How are the people supposed to know? I'm one of the if Moses was sent by God or Korach was sent by God. I'm sitting there listening to both of them. How can I tell?
Well, what happens in the Korach situation is we've already had lots of history, and so it should be very clear which side God is on. But B, they actually do a test. They do a test with their offerings and with their staves to see which one God favors. So there is room for honest skepticism. What Korach himself offered was not honest skepticism. In fact, I talked about that in more detail in last Shabbat's introduction to the Torah reading, about the notion that Korach manipulated the legitimate questions of the people as he himself played the demagogue to try and take over. So the people had legitimate questions, and he whipped them into anger and hate rather than allowing the legitimate questions to be handled respectfully. Okay. Onward.
Moshe Rabbeinu only sinned one sin, but the commentators burdened upon him 13 sins and more, for each one invented of his own heart a new sin. And perhaps there are several opinions written, and I am not aware of them.
Maybe even more. So Shadal here is saying, poor Moses. He hits the rock or whatever goes wrong there, and God says, all right, you're out. And every commentator since that moment has tried to come up with some new interpretation of what exactly Moses did, which if you list them all out, are like 13 plus different variations of different types of sins that God is punishing Moses for. Poor Moses. Here he is.
Yeah, the punishment was so harsh that people need to backfill reasons for it.
But God only mentions it once. You did this wrong, and yet people keep spinning more and more and more sins. And yes, each one is arguing my sin is the real sin, and all the other sins weren't the real sins. But what Shadal is pointing out is that you end up with Moses having a horrible reputation as being this egotistical, angered guy who is rebelling against God. I mean, it tears down Moses because of all of this smear, as Shadal is putting it, that goes against him through the cumulative effect of the commentaries.
And because of this, all my days I refrained from delving into an investigation in this matter, from the fear lest my investigation would come out to me a new explanation, and it would turn out that I too add a new sin to Moshe Rabbeinu.
So Shadal says, I'm not studying this. I'm not going to write commentary on the incident with the rock, because if I do, God forbid, I may come up with a new interpretation, and now Moses has a new sin. So we'll just leave it here, because I don't want to look too carefully at this poor guy. Moshe, he's our leader. He's our Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our leader, our teacher. Do we really want to look at all his warts? It's inappropriate. Better to let sleeping sins lie. Yes? Maybe? Read the next commentary.
Whoever says that Reuven sinned only errs, for it is said, now the sons of Jacob were 12. That's in Genesis. This teaches that all of them were equal.
All right, pause for a second, because we're going to get a list here, and I've had to do some cutting to make it fit on one page. Highly recommend going to the full version. There's a list of people that you think have done sins, and the Talmud is going to try and tell you, no, they didn't. So Reuben's suspected sin was sleeping with one of the concubines of his father, right? After his mother died, after Rachel died, Jacob went to her handmaiden as his next favorite partner. And Reuben, the firstborn of Leah, was a little upset by that. And so he moved his father's couch, which most commentators believe is a euphemism for hanky-panky, with his father's couch, meaning with his current lady. But the Talmud is saying here, how dare you? How dare you think that what he did was inappropriate? He did not have sex with anybody he shouldn't have. He just redirected his father towards his mother, meaning Leah, rather than towards the concubine. And it's just totally wrong of you to think that he did wrong, because look, it says the sons were 12. All of them were equal. This is at the very end of Genesis, so after the action, whatever it was, had been done. So how can you possibly suspect this innocent man? Shame on you. Similarly,
Whoever says that the sons of Eli sinned only errs. It says, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, priests to the Lord, were there.
right? They were priests to the Lord too. It seems in context that Eli's sons weren't so good. That's why Samuel ends up taking over. But it says they were priests to the Lord, and certainly they wouldn't get the title if they were as reprehensible as you might be thinking. So stop calling them sinners. Shame on you. You're suspecting innocent guys.
Whoever says that the sons of Samuel sinned errs, for it is said, and it happened that when Samuel was old, his sons did not walk in his ways.
What? Seems like they're not doing so good, right? And yet that's exactly the line that they're going to use to prove they're innocent.
It was in his ways that they did not walk, but they also didn't sin.
So there's such a thing as being not as good as your dad, but that doesn't make you a sinner. You know, just because they didn't walk in his ways. Samuel, who could walk in his ways? That's a pretty high bar. But that doesn't mean they were under the line as being negative people. They just were not as excellent as him. Shame on you for thinking otherwise, although there is very many verses in the Bible that seem to imply otherwise.
Whoever says David sinned errs, and David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Is it possible that even the opportunity to sin came his way, and yet the presence of God was with him?
And yet, David, I'm sure most of you are more familiar with the possible event that might be thought of as a problem. What's David's big event for which
husband of
Bathsheba and Uriah and the prophet Nathan even comes and says, you know, he gives the whole parable about the sheep and the guy with the lamb, and you stole the lamb. He goes and throws himself on God's mercy. It really reads like a statement of, I have sinned before God, and I am now seeking atonement. And yet the Talmud says, no, David never sinned. That whole thing, that wasn't a sin. They do, by the way, work out legally why it wasn't a sin, because in those days, men would give their wives a conditional get, divorce document, which, if they were to fail to come back from war, would become a retroactive divorce from the moment that they left. So therefore, when Uriah died, his wife was retroactively freed, and therefore she was a single woman when she and David were intimate. So because he died, David didn't sin.
But he died because
David said,
No, but he disobeyed the king. David said, go home to your wife, and he sat outside the door. So disobeying the king is a punishable offense anyway, so he was deserving of the death penalty. He had written a conditional get, says the rabbi, therefore it's all fine. No sin happened here. Move along. Nothing to see. Nothing to see.
and yet the child that he had with Bathsheba, that child died.
Yes.
So God.
The first child.
Yes, the first child,
Yes.
right, from this wonderful thing that
Correct.
had a retroactive get to it.
Yes.
Okay.
Why is the Talmud saying this? Why is it going so hard to try and defend these people?
Doesn't want you to accuse an innocent person.
Right. Accusing an innocent person, casting aspersions on innocent people is worse than saying these people did what it seems in the text they did.
Well, the other thing is what these people did was a lot worse than what Moses did. So now I got to say, well, Moses was fine. I'm not going to accuse him of sins. This is sins. Moses didn't do anything like this.
But again, the Torah didn't tell us exactly what Moses did.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as though the Torah is playing along and saying, Moses did something, but I'm not telling you what. What he did in that episode, there was a problem, but I'm not telling you what it was. I'm telling you it's a problem because you got to understand sort of why he is out of a job, but I'm not going to point it out because I don't want to tear down this noble person. This is a level of respect for leadership that is astonishing in the modern world. I mean, certainly in this country since Watergate, we have almost always looked the opposite, that we look at our leaders in order to tear them down. And if we don't find anything to tear them down, well, we might make it up. But if we legitimately can't find anything to tear them down, we're almost like disappointed that there's no dirt on them. This is saying, even if you think there's dirt, it's not dirt. Right? If you see mud on their shoes, that doesn't mean they've been in the mud. That means they were farming. You know, there's always a good explanation. I'm sure that they smell like flowers. Which is going to bring now to the personal level rather than just the leadership level with the next story, which also comes from Bamidbar, but a little bit later on.
The gatherer of wood was Zelophehad. Here, and while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks.
That was from before, right? There's a guy out gathering stick. They find him. He's doing it on Shabbat. Gathering wood on Shabbat, no. They take him to Moses and they say, we found this guy gathering wood. What do we do? Moses goes to God. God says it is the death penalty. So who was the guy gathering wood? He is not named in the Torah. It just says there was a guy gathering wood. The Midrash is saying that guy was Zelophehad. And if you don't know who Zelophehad is, don't worry, we'll fix that in just a second.
And they continue saying later, our father died in the wilderness, and that's in Numbers.
Okay, so who is the our of the our father? Those are the daughters of Zelophehad, who are asking Moses when they are doing the allotment of land for the land of Israel, what about us? Right? Our father died. There are no brothers, so no one can inherit our father's portion. Should our father's name disappear then? You know, and the text is saying the wilderness that was mentioned there and the wilderness that is mentioned here, that is the secret code that lets you know that the daughters of Zelophehad's father died as the wood gatherer, and that's why he died. He wasn't one of the Korach guys or one of the other groups that did something wrong. He was this person who did it. Make sense?
Well, the other part is when we impose a death penalty, the death penalty will be carried out by God in his own good time. So I thought what they meant here was he was gathering wood in the wilderness, and then when he died, that was God punishing him. Now, may have been many years later.
Oh, no. If you do something that is worthy of the death penalty and all of the judicial requirements are met, which are extensive, you are executed by the community. Straight up. You're not watching my Mishnah class on Sanhedrin, are you? Because we've been talking about the death penalty for a few weeks.
Yeah, no, I wasn't able to because we were traveling.
Yeah. So go back and look at the back episodes. It's quite detailed. And absolutely, again, the judicial bar is very, very high. It's not easy to convict for a capital crime. But if the conviction is reached, they are executed by the court. So he would have been executed at that moment. And especially with God saying, yeah, he's guilty, that also kind of means he would have been executed then and there.
Yeah, you went like this, but what did they do? Stone them?
For a Shabbat violation, it would have been stoning.
Stoning, because we don't do this thing.
Oh yeah,
beheading thing.
We did, absolutely. For murder, the penalty for murder was to be beheaded. Well, of course we don't do that. Oh, you mean see it in the text?
In the text.
Oh,
that's right.
right.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I don't see that. I've never seen it.
No, and like I said, the bar is very, very high. A court that would execute one person every 7 years was considered to be a bloody court. So we did not go left, right, and center doing this, but it is absolutely on the books. And when the conditions were right, it was implemented. There's a lot more to be said about that, but I refer you to the Mishnah class.
One way or the other, you are destined to stand in judgment.
Oh, hold on. Said to him, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, now, one way or another.
Oh, one way or the other, right. You are destined to stand in judgment. If you are right, the Torah protected him and you expose him. And if you are wrong, you slander the righteous man.
All right, so what's Rabbi Yehuda's problem with Rabbi Akiva's thing? With wilderness and wilderness, that means the wood gatherer was Zelophehad. Why is he upset? He's saying, Akiva, you're going to be judged for coming up with that story.
You're gossiping.
You're gossiping. Because either he isn't the same guy. It doesn't say Zelophehad for the wood gatherer, and your little wilderness wordplay, not enough. That's no proof. Therefore, Zelophehad was a perfectly innocent person, and you have slandered him. Or else, yeah, they really were the same guy, but the Torah deliberately didn't tell you they were the same guy. How dare you go out of your way to make it explicit? If the Torah didn't want to tell you that this was the same guy, why should you go blabbing that it was the same guy? Keep your mouth shut. If the Torah wanted you to know, it would have told you. If it didn't want you to know, it didn't tell you. It didn't tell you, so you shouldn't go around telling. And that's on the personal level, right? We're not talking about leaders now. It's about how do we speak accusingly of other people. Even if we think we're justified, even if we think our analysis of what we think they have done is correct. If we're not 100% sure, or if there especially is no direct implication to our accusation other than the titillation of gossip, keep your mouth shut. And really, in the long run, it's even better to train ourselves not to accuse each other, even in our own hearts, not to suspect each other of wrongdoing. Sometimes we have to act. Obviously, judgment is needed in some cases, but we should be very, very reluctant to suspect each other of bad. Let's go ahead and continue on.
They angered him, God, also at the waters of Meribah, and it went ill with Moses because of them, for they embittered his spirit, and he spoke rashly with his lips.
Right? So this is coming back to the question of what did Moses do? Because as much as we've just now established, keep your mouth shut, don't out secrets, don't accuse people rashly, almost don't accuse people at all with that whole story of David and everything. The book of Psalms accuses Moses, and that's biblical. So that has some standing to it. You're not going to chew out the book of Psalms the same way you might chew out Rabbi Akiva. Not that I ever would, but the book of Psalms says that Moses, spoke rashly, that Moses became angry. It exonerates him in the sense that he was embittered by these people. They were really, really annoying, but it also spells out his sin in a way that the Torah itself didn't, right? It's saying here, what was his problem? According to the book of Psalms, what was Moses's sin? His cardinal offense.
Spoke rashly.
What he said, right? Listen up, you rebels, shall we get water from this rock? That was the problem. The striking, not so much, right? The striking twice, not so much. Again, according to the book of Psalms. The going back to the tent rather than going directly to help the people, not such the big problem. But something in what he said, that was the problem.
And we usually look at it the other way. That is, what we say isn't as important as what we do.
Very
it's our
often.
actions that matter. And yet here, turning it around, that he did the wrong thing, but his words were even worse.
Correct, because especially when you are a leader, the words you use to explain your actions are what help make sense of your actions to the people who follow. That's why even at this day of tweets being the pinnacle of communication, speeches still matter. Right? When a president or when a politician or a CEO or a leader of a charity makes a speech as they inaugurate some new event, some new policy, or accept some gift, they are framing what's happening in a particular way. And that framing is almost as important, or sometimes even more important, than the policy or deed itself. The words matter, says the book of Psalms. And what Moses did was he failed in that moment to frame the event in a way that would bring sanctity to God's name, to actually make the people come closer to God. Instead, whatever he did failed to reach that goal. He gave the wrong speech. Yeah. Last commentary.
Who were the men whom the Torah referred to here as the elite of the nation?
Back with Korach. So Korach has a whole bunch of people with him. One of the groups are called by this nebulous term, the elite of the nation. And the commentator, Dad Sikanim, would like to explain who they were.
They were Elitzur ben Shteur, the leader of the tribe of Ruvain and his companions. Even though the Torah did not name them here, it provided us with hints to their identity. We find the expression, and distinguished men from among the children of Israel, which is in Numbers.
Early on in Numbers.
Early on. They appear here again later, again, almost referred to in identical terms.
So if this sounds very familiar to the same way Rabbi Akiva found out who Zelophehad was as the wood gatherer, that is indeed what's going on here.
Because no words are accidental in the Torah.
Right, but didn't we just say we're not supposed to do that? Keep going.
Our sages explained this in a parable. When a person up to that time, respected for his absolute integrity, was found having stolen something in the public bath, and the owner of the stolen object did not want to embarrass the thief, he started throwing out hints, such as asking the thief, "Who stole your robe?" He assumed that a person of high repute would realize that it was he who was referred to, and after the owner, describing the thief in detail without mentioning his name, would give him a chance to return the stolen object, making some excuse. The Torah did something similar here by not referring to these rebels by name.
All right, so this is going to be our uneasy truce with the conflict that hopefully you've got percolating within you. The conflict is we shouldn't suspect the innocent. We shouldn't slander those that have done no wrong. We shouldn't even we should go out of our way to try and clear the name of leaders and other people from wrongdoing. Except we also do need to protect justice and protect the community when talking about leaders, and we do need to fight the good fight on the side of right. And that should be our constant tension. There is no silver bullet of never suspect the righteous of wrongdoing. Sometimes the righteous, or at least in many other ways, do some things that are very, very wrong. And also, we should never suspect everyone of always wrongdoing, because that embitters ourselves and embitters our community. But we must start always from the point of view of trying not to suspect, and when given evidence that we should suspect, giving the person a chance to clear themselves discreetly, politely, without any more public humiliation or embarrassment. And only if all of that fails, then yes, we have to spell out exactly what was done in order that we can fix the crime that was committed. It's a reasonable path. It's just one that's very, very hard to always follow. One, because we don't like to suspect our own heroes, and we love to suspect the heroes of others. So, you know, if you belong to a particular group, you are more than likely to come up with 1,001 excuses for why the leaders of your group have never done anything wrong, despite all evidence that may have been brought against them. And you may believe that the leaders of your oppositional group have done 1,001 things wrong, despite there being very little evidence. It's the nature of our way of congregating. And this is saying, no, you don't suspect people to start. If there's evidence, you give them a chance politely, privately, modestly to fix what they may or may not have done. And only then, if there is still a crime that is outstanding that needs to be fixed by the community, and again, needs to be fixed by the community is the important one, then yes, it has to be brought into some form of resolution. It's hard. Even Moses loses his temper. We all lose our temper. And when we lose our temper, we love to accuse people because if I'm upset, why shouldn't everyone else? But that doesn't work. It kept Moses out of the land of Israel, and it keeps all of us in a very painful place as well. So dampen the suspicions, but also be prepared to properly recognize proper evidence of wrongdoing, even of our cherished heroes. And that's not an easy thing to do.
And we always do the easy thing.
What's that?
And we always do the easy thing.
Well, unless we truly want to adhere to Torah, and if we truly want to draw closer to God. If that's our ultimate goal, then we use that as our lever.
That's not an excuse. I'm just saying that's human nature.
I know.
Easy way out.
And God asks us to be better than our nature. And for the sake of ourselves and our country and our world, let's hope we live up to it.
Right.